cost me hours of work last night.
Then I'll get right to it. You have to go back into retirement. You're upsetting too many people.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you always have to be like this? You played right into their hands last time. When the parents' groups and the subcommittees came after us, you're the one they pointed to. You act like a criminal.
We are criminals, Clark. We always have been. You're still one, too. Only difference is you have a boss.
And you answer to no one. You know, we almost had this talk 10 years ago, when you wouldn't go along with the deal we made. Everyone else agreed. Diana went back to her people. Hal left the planet.
And Oliver, did he agree?
That's not how I wanted that to go.
He was all torn up about it, too.
He made it necessary. Like
I'm about to.
Do you even remember why you retired?
I remember.
Look, either shut it down or one of these days someone with authority is going to tell me to come stop you. And when that happens...
When that happens, may the best man win.
I have to go. We'll finish this later.
No hurry.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and we're talking DC animation today, so I figured I'd bring back the guy who I've had on to talk about a bunch of DC animated stuff, and that's Stacy Dooks. Stacy, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Hey, everybody. Get yourself a beverage, get situated, because we are gonna talk about this movie. And if you haven't seen it, do yourself an absolute favor. Find it on streaming somewhere, watch it. You can pause this podcast, come back, and believe me, we're gonna talk your ear off about it.
Yeah, because it's a big movie. It's 2.5 hours long is the uncut they got the two compilations edited together, which is what I picked up because I didn't want to go for when they released it in the two individual segments, part 1 and part 2. I'm just like, oh no, I know what they're doing here. I'm gonna wait. So I waited, and I'm so glad I did and got it all in one sitting.
Absolutely. It is it's well worth the wait. I mean, part 1 and part 2, they can function sort of as separate entities, but I think they work best when they're together with kind of like the whole theme of The Dark Knight Rises and then The Dark Knight Falls.
So I don't think we actually said what it is, but we're talking about the Dark Knight Returns, the animated film from fairly recently. It was just like a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was back in.
So it was 2012 is when part 1 came out, and 2013 was part 2.
10 years old. Wow.
Yeah. So before we jump too much into the movie, what's your history with Dark Knight Returns, the comic?
Oh, it is a tale, my friend, of youthful enthusiasm followed by a growing leeriness and resigned weariness with the property. It's not that I hate it. It's still a pretty good story, aside from some bits that have not aged particularly well. But on the whole, it's at the time when it was coming out in '86, it was wild. I remember trying to get the series in the prestige format, like slim paperbacks. And I remember going to a comic book store and getting part 2, The Dark Knight Triumphant, and part 4, The Dark Knight Falls. And I still have those books to this day. And trying to bring them to my dad, who used to always buy me comics off the newsstand and everything. And he's like, $20 for a comic? And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. But he was good enough to buy them for me despite his reservations. My parents were always great about letting me read whatever I wanted to read, and at the time, that it did have that tag suggested for mature readers. And then you read some of that stuff and it's like, wow, this ain't the Dick Sprang Batman. This ain't even like Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. This is some darker stuff.
Yeah. So you read it actually when it was coming out at the time then?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
I had those first 2, and then eventually when they did the trade, I was able to grab the trade paperback with the classic, him in the pose against the lightning, and the Alan Moore introduction, which was pretty big back then, because Alan Moore had just done Watchmen, and this was the whole thing with that. And I remember reading it over like the course of like a feverish Friday night, just like devouring the story and really quite enjoying it and engaging with it as a kind of response to the perhaps the more goofier aspects of Batman that had been in previous stuff, you know, your Silver Age, and of course the whole, like, Frank Miller's made no secret that his version was a response to the Adam Westing of Batman media.
Right.
He wanted to give Batman his teeth back, and you watch as he gradually deconstructs and reconstructs the character, because when he shows up in part one, he's wearing the classic blue and gray with the big yellow oval in the bat, and then that uniform gets destroyed over the course of his adventure with Harvey Dent, and then he puts on the dark bat symbol and the costume gets progressively darker, and he becomes more and more, less and less a superhero and more like this mythic figure carved from granite. So it's pretty interesting, and I remember reading it and being like, wait, Superman's the bad guy? And I was like, this was the first time that it ever happened, kids. And thankfully, they've been very sparing about using the concept of an evil Superman. Like, you barely see any of that. You barely see any of that in the media these days. I mean, it's so wild. But here's the thing. Well, Miller manages to keep the characters relatively true to who they are. The friction that comes between them is that Clark still believes in the system, and Batman has no time for it anymore. Like he's just been taking it in the teeth since he retired, and we don't really know the circumstances of his retirement. That's one of the things that they play pretty loosey goosey. It probably has something to do with the empty Robin uniform, and Jason Todd, and how Jason is not mentioned anywhere beyond in passing.
Right.
But and you just see him just get so fed up with the system, and till the point where he reaches tilt, and finally he gives in because the presence of Batman bursts out of him like a rusted cage. It's really cool.
Yeah. I first read it, so I was too young to read it at the time. I didn't get into reading comics until the 90s or so, and but I was reading Wizard back in the time, and Wizard would talk about nonstop about how like the two greatest comic books ever were Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. And so eventually, when I had the opportunity, I picked it up and read the graphic novel, and it wasn't as revelatory for me as it was for other people, because I had grown up with like the Batman the Animated Series and Tim Burton's Batman. So it was all that stuff that was influenced by Dark Knight Returns. So it wasn't that surprising to me, but it was still really good. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is a really good story. One of the interesting things I remembered, though, as you're talking about Jason Todd, is my assumption of it for years was that this came out after Death in the Family, and that's why Jason Todd was dead in it. But actually, it was the opposite. This came out before Death in the Family, which when I found out about that, it blew my mind.
Yeah, because at that point, this was still, I think, in and around the post-crisis era. Like Batman Year One and Batman The Dark Knight Returns kind of came out during that no man's land between when Jason Todd was this young orphan who, he was an acrobat as well. He had red hair. He got adopted by Bruce Wayne. He dyed his hair black. He became the second Robin, to the post-crisis version where he boosts the tires off the Batmobile and would eventually, die at the hands of the Joker, kind of like the Robin gone wrong.
Right.
So yeah, it's really interesting.
And actually, speaking of that too, this came out before Year One, correct?
I think so, yeah. Batman The Dark Knight Returns showed the ending, and then because it was such a huge hit, Miller pretty much had carte blanche. So he decided to go back to Batman's beginnings and do Batman Year One with
that was Mazzucchelli. Yeah.
Mazzucchelli, yeah.
I'm Mazzucchelli. I'm not sure how if I'm pronouncing it right. Yeah.
Please forgive us.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the interesting thing about Dark Knight Returns is it's one of those books that, and I was really thinking about this when I'm rewatching the movie last night, is it's almost been too influential on Batman.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I as I get older, I find myself really gravitating more towards the Denny O'Neil, the Bruce Timm Paul Dini, the Grant Morrison Batman, the one who, he's dark, but he's not sadistically fascistic.
No, that's the where he's more like this globe-trotting adventurer who is the best at everything
Right.
because he just is. Like one of my favorite pump your fist moments from the Grant Morrison run is that sweet line where the shot's over Batman's grave and it's like digging your way up from 6 feet under is very difficult. And then the next shot's Batman clawing out of his own grave, but not impossible. And I was just like, fuck yes, Batman. Like
I got to reread that run again.
That shit oh God, it's so good. Batman Inc., that whole era. That is my jam, my jelly. You know, put it on my breakfast toast. That and the All-Star Batman, not All-Star Batman. Not All-Star Batman and Robin. Please forgive me, my brain farted for a second. The Batman and Robin featuring Dick Grayson.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And Damian Wayne. That team is great. Happy Batman, Grumpy Robin. Amazing.
You know, in fact, the episode I recorded just before this one, we were talking about Teen Titans, the Judas Contract, and talking about the Dick and Damian relationship. And I said in there and just like, and you know what? This really makes me want to see a Batman and Robin animated film, where we see like the Dick Grayson Batman and Damian Wayne Robin partnership.
Yeah, they were really great. And that series also introduced the most logical thing in the world, which is a flying Batmobile, because you know, Gotham's based on New York and New York traffic. I don't know how a Batmobile could function in that, but it's just one of those concepts that we accept, kind of like the bat signal. Like you would think that Jim Gordon would have like a burner phone that he just texts Batman from, like, need to meet, let's meet on the roof. But that image is so striking of the bat symbol against the clouds that we all just kind of agree to roll with it and not really pull on those threads too much. But
well, there's a great reference to that in the movie and in the book when he goes up to the roof of Gotham PD and he's about to and he tells the officers like, all right, fire up the bat signal. He's like, isn't there a better way to contact him? He's like, oh yeah, at least a dozen. But
but this way they all know.
Yeah, and I love that idea because we even saw that it referenced in a way in Dark Knight Return, the Dark Knight as well, the movie.
The Dark Knight,
because you know, obviously he's got a way to contact Gordon because he's got Alfred texting him all this stuff, but he's still using the bat signal, and it's just kind of like, you know, he never shows up when we put it up, but we just want to have it on so people know he's out there.
It's also referenced in The Batman, where it's just like the signal reminds you of Batman's presence, and then they look in every shadow and they're not sure if he's in there or not. And some of them are just like, nope, I'm not feeling it. I'm not going to do the shitty thing I was about to do. I don't want to run into that guy.
Which is why and that's more of a modern interpretation of it, but it makes a whole lot of sense because I remember watching a Batman 66 movie when they have the bat signal and it's like, but you've got the bat phone too. Why are you doing the signal? And they never mention it.
You know what? You just got to respect a bit. Like you respect the fact that even the Adam West version recognizes that psychological warfare is useful in crime fighting. And that's part of the shtick, the signal, the outfit, like it's all there for intimidation. I absolutely love it.
So now when this movie came out, I'm like I said, I watched it all in one hit, and I hadn't read Dark Knight Returns in a while when I actually watched this movie. And I think it was maybe about like 2 or 3 years ago that I finally, because I sold my collection when my parents downsized and because I wasn't going to ship all that stuff.
Yeah, that's fair.
So then I started just getting stuff digitally after that. And I picked up Dark Knight Returns on one of the many Comixology sales and reread it maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, and rereading it again and then watching the movie, I gotta say, you know what? I think I kind of prefer the movie in a lot of ways.
The movie streamlines a lot of stuff and then also files the rough edges off some stuff that hasn't aged particularly well.
Yeah. I mean, like one thing that jumps out to me right away is the narration. Like, God, Frank Miller's narration. And it really hit me when I rewatched Sin City after like 10 years. I'm like, oh my God, this is so bad.
Well, it works within the medium. That's the thing. It's kind of like how in the Superman Batman comics that Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness did, that internal monologue would have been interminable in a film. But it works well in the comic because it gives you a snapshot into their heads. I mean, I still love my favorite piece of the monologuing from, well, this would be a good death. That's pretty cool.
That's a good one.
But also the bit where it isn't easy to drag 300 pounds of sociopath up to the top of a skyscraper, but the scream alone is worth it. And you're just like, and I'm just like, look, so, like, don't get me wrong, Frank Miller's Batman is a colossal dick, but I will give him this: he is a showman. He will find the way to break his opponent and then apply that shit like a scalpel. So I got to give him that. Like, he's definitely more jackbooted than any other versions that I've run into, but you know, you got to give him credit. Like that whole bit where he rescues the kid, and in the comics, it's vague as to whether or not he shot the guy, but you hear the gun go off, and he's just like, "I'll do it, man." He's like, "I believe you," and the guy's just dead. And the whole bit about, I know my rights, and he's like, "Sure, you got rights, lots of rights. Sometimes I count them at late at night just to make myself angrier and angrier." Like he is intensely creepy, and it works in the film.
Yeah. I want to talk about that scene with the gunshot, because I think that's a very misinterpreted scene, and that's one of the things that this movie makes it very clear what's happening there, which I'm so glad they did. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the casting of this, because
this thing's got a pedigree. I have to say.
I mean, Peter Weller as Batman, like, you know, I know everyone's like, Kevin Conroy is the greatest, they should never be any other, but honestly, I think Peter Weller's kind of perfect for this version of Batman.
He's pretty good, but he wasn't my my first choice, because if you'll recall, during Batman the Animated Series, there is an episode called Legends of the Dark Knight,
right? Yeah,
and they do a brief sequence set in the continuity of Dark Knight Returns, and Batman's voiced by Michael Ironside.
Oh, right,
and that shit was dope, where he like does the operating table bit. Like, chills. And don't get me wrong, Weller's very game with the material. But sometimes I just think about what we could have had, and I'm like, damn.
There was one
part. Very good.
There is one part when Peter Weller, I think, kind of falls short, and that's when he gives that speech on the horseback.
Absolutely,
in the blackout. It feels like I'm just like, your voice sounds like it's a little bit high pitched in this moment. It doesn't seem it's not working right.
It's not quite where you want it to be, and you know, Ironside would have fucking crushed it. Oh my god, let's ride. I would have been like, yes, Batman, let's do this shit. Yeah, I would have been right there with the Sons of Batman, like, which we'll talk about in a bit, because oh god, the gangs in the Dark Knight Returns are just, oh my god.
Well, another thing about this that I think is really interesting is just the it makes me wonder what happened to Frank Miller, because he used to be so on point with the social commentary.
Yeah, he was pretty good. He was pretty good in ways of, like, you know, he had the whole thing where he anticipated the era of Fox News and talking heads, because all the talking heads in The Dark Knight Returns, from Lana Lang to Jimmy Olsen to the psychiatrist, the Dr. Phil Phil, who thinks he's rehabilitated the Joker. Oh, bless.
And thinks he rehabilitated Harvey Dent as well.
Oh yes, absolutely. You know, he's the quack psychiatrist that, you know, is ostensibly kind of Miller's stand-in for bleeding heart liberals.
He's got a few of that. Like, he's also got
a little. There's a vein, yeah.
There's also they're doing the interviews with the man on the street interviews, and there's that one, like, you know, upper class white guy who says, like, oh, I think it's a terrible violation of their rights. He's like, oh no, I would never live in the city. Whereas and then they show the black guy who lives in the city. He's like, hey, I hope he comes after my landlord next.
Yeah. In the original comics, though, it was like, I think he's great, I hope he goes after the homos next. And
that's gotta yeah.
Jeesh, Frank. Jeesh. I mean, but yeah, it's an incredible cast.
But I wonder how much of that was intentional, because he seemed to be taking both sides to task a lot.
Yes,
in the original.
He had a bit more like open season on both, like the hardline right, the hardline left. He definitely had a lot of vitriol to dispense against Ronald Reagan, but then again, the line for that forms to the left. But, you know, Frank.
But I don't even think he was so much against the hardline left, because when you look at the hardline, like, that's
Yeah,
Oliver
yeah.
Queen is definitely representative of that.
Oh
And-
man, like yes, I agree. Like in later Frank would probably broom Oliver Queen off screen pretty quick, or just make him into a raving lunatic. In this, Oliver Queen is just like this kind of like mellowed out hippie who's just like really just tired of the man, tired of the bullshit, went underground, became an outlaw, and something happened where like something happened with Superman because he's like, I want a piece of him because it still hurts when it's cold. And he looks at the stump where his arm used to be. So you wonder what happened there. So
yeah, and so and like honestly, I think Ollie's like the most well-adjusted of anybody in the fucking series.
yeah, he's the most chill motherfucker. He knows exactly the whole game's rigged. Don't bother trying to play. Just fucking do what you need to do and get out. And he kind of teaches Batman how to do that because Batman ultimately goes underground with his followers. And it's clear he's going to start teaching them how to be Batmen, Batwomen, Bat people, and spread out into the world. So that's one of those things. But we're kind of skipping ahead a little bit. We'll get that. We'll get to that. We'll get to
but I think that's even though it's Batman's ostensibly the hero here, I think that in some ways, if you look at what Miller was doing, I don't think he was necessarily saying that this is a good version of Batman. Like, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird.
It's a strange dichotomy where, we all accept at a certain level that superheroes and violence are kind of tied together. And it's a cartoony violence.
Right.
And it's something that, on its own, back in the day, back in the Silver Age, you punched a giant starfish in the face and, everybody went home happy and it was a great day for everybody. And, it was as we mentioned earlier, like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns became the two staples of DC. And unfortunately, I think to a greater or lesser extent, those two amazing books just steamrolled DC Comics. Like they all wanted to be realistic. They all wanted to show consequences, and it's a tough road to hoe because you have to accept the juxtaposition that Superman is one of the kindest, most sweetest people on the planet. But he's also got a whole lot of power, and that kind of power could be very dangerous. I think it's one of the reasons we see Superman as a more threatening figure now, because we're less willing to trust people in power who ostensibly have our best interests at heart.
Right.
It can be very difficult. So it's a tough road to hoe. And I think Miller was one of the first people, like, in his way, to be like, if these characters like Batman are the inheritors of characters like the Shadow and stuff like that, they are intrinsically at once very damaged people and people who operate outside the law because they got no time for it. And that can be a good thing in some ways and a bad thing in others. And he illustrates both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
Because Batman is fucking brutal when he's like, he was the first to introduce the idea that the Batarang wasn't just to knock guns out of people's hands. They were shrieking.
Yeah.
They were shrieking. Yeah. They were meant to go into flesh. And you see that in the book when he like launches them and they embed in that one mutant guy's arm. And you're like, oh, I get it now. Oh boy. And yeah, and he's just talking about how he'll clinically like break this bone, break that bone, knock that thing back, and and he shows the consequences of violence on himself because his body is barely holding together.
Yeah.
Even Alfred, who's like older than time at this point, is like, if you want to commit suicide, there are less painful ways. I have an old herbal remedy. Like even at 90, Alfred is just dishing it. Just oh, love him.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing is like, and I think this is a larger conversation about
we're
trying to get Dark Knight but I think it's a good one to have because I think like it's those two books I think are like it's funny because they're both such classics of the medium. They're like the most off-cited greatest comic books ever type of thing. But they're both the most misunderstood comics of all time.
A lot of the wrong lessons were taken from those. And Alan Moore even had to kind of come to Jesus later. That's why he started doing books like Supreme, the Story of the Year, and the ABC books that he did, like Tom Strong, Promethea, Gray Shirt, because he wanted to try and bring some of that whimsy back because he realized that, his deconstructionist antics had kind of like taken the poor genre and left it a little mutilated there. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. Those books are so amazing and so great and hold up a lens to the medium. But unfortunately, everybody saw that and was like, we need one of those. We need a Watchmen. We need a Dark Knight Returns. And don't get me wrong, we've gotten some good graphic novels that have been in that vein, like Kingdom Come and stuff of that nature. But I think that in their efforts to make
but even Kingdom Come, I think, was more a hopeful story. It was more
yes, it was a
than anything
response.
else. Yeah.
It was a dialogue. It was the medium having a dialogue with itself.
Right.
So.
Yeah. But also, like, it's funny because I had read I read the Spawn Compendium Volume 1 recently, and so it's like the first 50
My brother
issues.
loves Spawn. You should have him on.
It's it's funny. Like, I love Spawn when I was in middle school and high school. Like, everybody,
cool,
and I reread it, and when I'm reading the compendium, I'm like, it's not bad. There's some it's fun. There's some interesting stuff in there. It's not good either, but it's.
I mean, look, not everything has to be Shakespeare. Sometimes you go to something for a steak. Sometimes you just want cheeseburger. That's
right. Exactly. Yeah. But I'm rereading it, and it's funny how, especially the early issues, how much Todd McFarlane wants to be Frank Miller in The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah. He really had that kind of bromance. So much so that when he had an opportunity to team up with DC, of course he pulled Frank, and they did Batman Spawn, which, as Miller has maintained, is in line with the Dark Knight Returns version of Batman, which, scratch your head on that one. But thankfully, Miller never made any sequels to the Dark Knight Returns, and we can all thankfully not have to deal with any of that. Don't go looking, kids. Don't go looking.
I got some bad news for you.
Oh, I know.
Oh, I will say, The Master Race was not bad. I'm not sure if you read that. It was
no,
and I think it was a big part of it was it had you had Adam. I think it was Adam. It was either Adam Kubert or Andy Kubert doing the art.
Yeah, one of the Kuberts. Yeah,
and you had and Brian Azzarello doing the scripting.
Kind of acting as a filter. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it worked a lot better when you had Brian Azzarello acting as a filter for Frank.
I'm not saying no. It's just that Frank and I have become very different people since the era of The Dark Knight Returns, and we want different things. It's like how everybody, and talks up Tom King, and Tom King, amazing creator. And I don't dispute that the man is talented, but he and I want very different things. He wants to tell the story of Adam Strange as a war criminal. And I'm like, no, please. I would like him to just fight space pirates and have amazing Buck Rogers-esque adventures drawn by Doc Shaner. We want different things. It's not necessarily right, not necessarily wrong. He goes his way, I go mine. So
right.
You gotta give a little to get a little, I guess.
And then we had there was also the Last Crusade, which was like the prequel almost to Dark Knight Returns, which was again, it was okay. It wasn't like it. Nothing was like, it wasn't as offensively bad as like Dark Knight Strikes Again or All-Star Batman and Robin.
It's kind of like before Watchmen with the Minutemen thing done by Darwin Cook, where you're like, okay, I know that in no way, shape, or form Alan Moore or Dave Gibbons might approve of this, but okay, I'll roll with it.
Or like even like the Watchmen TV series, where Alan Moore is never gonna watch but it's a good addition to it.
But it is an interesting. It is playing with the toys and finding new ways to do things. And if he were ever of a mind to watch it, I think he might groove on it a bit.
Yeah, I don't think he'd ever tell anybody, but
no, he would go to the great beyond, not telling anybody about that.
But also going back to Dark Knight Returns and some of the violence and like. One of the things that really it's so weird reading this now or rewatching this now after like all the BLM stuff and all the police reckoning and all that, and just like, and you see a lot of those threads early on in this, which makes me wonder, like, how much is this Frank Miller saying this is a good thing? How much is it Frank Miller saying like, you don't really want Batman like this? Because I feel like even he doesn't know, because I'm watching that scene when he's that first night when he comes back and he's got the guy down, he's like breaking his legs, and you've got the cop standing over him and just kind of like, he's like, hey, he's like laughing it up with him and everything. And I'm just like, this is really fucking, he's breaking that guy's legs right there.
Yeah. Where the young idealistic cop is like, step away from him. And the older cop is like, you don't want it. You're in for a show tonight, son. And like the whole bit of like, these men are mine. Like, don't fuck with me. I'm about to fuck with them. And there's this interesting commentary within you could make an argument that there's an authoritarian vibe to Batman and an anti-authoritarian vibe to Batman.
Yeah.
And it all depends on how you choose to interpret his symbol. And, you know, there's the whole bit when he defeats the mutant leader, he breaks the guy, absolutely wrecks him. And then a bunch of his followers are like, that's the guy. And they start painting their faces with bat symbols and start becoming the sons of Batman. And start doing vigilante justice with shotguns. And and that's where you're like, the power of the symbol. And there's that whole bit where Superman, you know, he's become an agent of the government. Like he's basically the DC Earth Ronald Reagan equivalent of using a nuke. Like this is our response. And when he goes to Corto Maltese and he like, there's that powerful image of him lifting the tank over his head. And he's like, you know, and he talks about how Diana went back to her people, Hal went to the stars. We can't remind them that gods walk among them. And there's that bit where he says, and then you laughed, Bruce, that scary laugh of yours. And you said, of course we're criminals. We've always been criminals. And it's just like, yeah, you're right. You're not wrong. Like his figure and his image can be interpreted in so many different ways. And sometimes I think even the character of Batman himself doesn't realize what kind of influence he's having. Like he just wants to go out, grab crime by the throat and choke it. But, you know, there's at the same time, there's people who are like, well, due process of law. I mean, there's a whole dialogue you could have about the Gotham Police Department under Jim Gordon. And then when the young woman comes on, Yindel, that whole thing where it's like, you know, the Gotham police force under Gordon has been very pro-Batman, even when he was retired. When he comes back, he's got that whole thing, one last time, old friend. And then once Yindel takes over, she's just like, nope, we're going to arrest this motherfucker. He is a dangerous vigilante and he needs to be brought to justice. And you're like, and then he and Yindel have that whole conversation about Pearl Harbor, which is pretty interesting. So it's wild. I think that this work more than anything else was Miller fishing around for like, what is Batman and what does Batman ultimately mean? And I think his conclusion is that Batman is ultimately, you know, this figure who wanted to war on crime and he's still kicking in that can, but, you know, he's like, this would be a good death. This will be a good life. And what does it ultimately mean? He kind of leaves it to the reader at the end. Like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I leave it to you. So, and then, you know.
That's the thing. Like I said, I don't even know if Frank really knew what he was doing with this. If he really had a good handle on it, because because I know if you read his later stuff, I mean, he's got this very, his post 9/11 stuff has got this very reactionary right-wing vibe to it. But you go back and you read this and I'm just like, his politics are kind of all over the place in this.
Yeah, it's almost as if he's having an internal dialogue with himself about where he wants to land, because and the two polarities of it are Superman and Batman. Like Superman is very much about, look, the system isn't perfect. I acknowledge the system isn't perfect, but it's the best system that's working right now, and I have to do what I can to support it from behind the scenes. I'll work within the system and hopefully maybe try to play to the better angels of the system's nature. And Batman's just like, fuck the system. The system doesn't work, and we should probably burn it to the fucking ground.
I've actually got something to counter that, because I don't think it's that Batman wants to burn the system to the ground, because he works within the system a lot too, with the police force.
To a bit,
I think it's more that he thinks that the system doesn't go far enough. It seems to be, but like, but then, and I think Ollie is the third point on that triangle, because then you got Ollie is very much the fuck the system, burn it all down.
Fuck the system, burn it all down. But yeah, and I think that you see that argument kind of play out, where Batman is just like, the system, I will allow the system to operate so far. And if the system drops the ball, I will be there to pick it up and spike it at the, you know, end goal line.
Right.
Like he's very much about that. And I think that you watch that progression as he, you know, builds himself up, as he takes down the mutant gang, as he takes on Carrie Kelly. He's very much, you know, trying to, it's essentially how Batman got his groove back. Like he's trying to get back in the game after so long, and he wants to I don't necessarily know if he's pointing himself at the mutant leader. Well, there's one point where it's very clear he might be pointing himself at the mutant leader as a suicide mission. But when he recovers and bounces back, that's when he's like, yeah, I'm back. We're gonna do this. I'm gonna retake Gotham and establish that this is my turf in my city. If you try to fuck around, you will find out.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think he's very much that third point. And I think also too, I'm looking at this and I feel like this story is basically Batman's midlife crisis.
Oh yes, without a doubt, because this is where Batman turns 50.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, he and Gordon have that celebratory, you know, drink together, and it's just like, remember when you used to just have champagne?
Mm-hmm.
You would just have like ginger ale instead, and you were like playing that whole millionaire playboy act. And it's just like, and you start to see him looking around, and like he's been throwing himself into other things, because there's the race car bit where he's like in a helmet that looks a lot like his Batman fucking helmet, which is like, he might be at the point where he's like, yeah, if people figure it out, they figure it out. I don't really give a shit anymore. Because he's like, you know, he's not necessarily suicidal, but he's not too bummed out about being in a situation where he might die in a ball of flame.
Well, I think that when you said that he's kind of pointing himself at the mutant leader as like a suicide mission, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I never really thought too much about that until you said that, but that kind of clicked it together, because and like he says and you know, this narration's not in the movie, but in the comic, when he says like, this would be a good death, but not good enough.
But not
and,
good enough.
and then he bails out. And I feel like that's the same thing. I think part of him does want to die, at least in that first half of the story.
Exactly. Where like he has had this adversarial relationship with the figure of the Batman in his psyche. He has kept it locked down and tapped down for years, to the point that when he finally snaps during the thunderstorm, he hears the voice in his head like, you've been trying to keep me locked up. You are a frail old man, and you have to fulfill your commitments to me, because I've been waiting, pacing like a tiger in the cage, and you're going to let me out. And there's that whole bit in the Batmobile, which is like a freaking tank. And I always love the bit in the monologue where it's like, the Batmobile, that was you, Dick. That was the name a kid would give it. And so, yeah. And that was always just fun. And when he's looking at the mutant leader, like he's huge. He's like nobody we ever fought before. And Alfred is in his ear like, sir, he will kill you. Like, he's just like, he will destroy you. And he turns off the mic and goes out to fight it. Like, it's a great splash battle, but it's wrong, because he shouldn't be doing this. He's punching outside his weight class right now. He's deliberately trying to fight the mutant leader on his terms, and that's the mistake. And it takes Robin showing up, Carrie Kelly, to pull him back from the edge. And that's where Carrie enters the story, and her contribution cannot be understated. Like, she's the one who kind of puts him back on the path, and he realizes, oh shit, I was kind of going off on a thing there. Because when he's like, my name's Bruce. Yeah. And when, you know, and one of the best moments in all of comics, in my opinion, is when he's like, what's your name? And she's like, Carrie Kelly. And then she pauses and goes, Robin. And I'm just like, fuck yeah, kid. Fuck yeah, you are.
But yeah, I like that aspect. And I feel like this introduced something, because I remember Frank Miller talking in an interview or something about Robin. And when he was first sitting down to like start planning the story, he's like, no, Robin's bullshit and all that. And then I think it was John Byrne who actually kind of changed his mind about this, and kind of showed him a drawing with like Batman like really dark, and then like having Robin as like this splash of color, and showing that that contrast. And then I think Miller kind of came to this realization that, oh, Robin is supposed to be this kind of like moderating influence on Batman, so that he doesn't go too deep into that. And I think you're right. I think after he gets, you know, annihilated by the mutant leader, and then he meets Carrie, and then he tells her, my name's Bruce. And I think that is kind of this moment where, and I think you're right, she does become kind of this moderating influence a little bit, where he's less about, let me just punch all my problems away, let's try and think strategically, because now I got a kid to worry about too, who's involved in this.
Yeah, she's the future. And he recognizes that he has a purpose now because he's going to teach her.
Yeah.
And there's that whole bit in the cave where he recovers, he has his spirit vision where he communes with the bat creature and they kind of make their peace with each other. And he comes back out of the cave and she gives him a big old hug. And Alfred's just like, look, I don't want to bring it up, but have you forgotten about Jason?
Yeah.
And she has that moment where she's looking at the Robin costume in the glass case. And he's just like, Jason was a good soldier. He honored me, but the war goes on. And it's just like, at once that is as close as this version of Bruce will get to acknowledging the loss and then embracing that there's someone new. And their dynamic is great, where there's the whole bit of like, if you leave this cockpit, you are fired. And she comes up with an ingenious way of like, she reworks the control panels and gets the boosters to respond to the code word peel. And Batman, and she's just like, am I fired? And he's like, you're not fired. And she's like smiling, like she's kind of won him over. It's a great dynamic between the two. And it's important to show that for all his fascist leanings, there is a trace of a human being in there somewhere. Like, it's buried under a lot of cynicism and a lot of need to distribute violence, but he still has a heart underneath all that.
Well, I think that's also shown, and this is what annoys me too a lot about the interpretations of this over the years, especially down to Zack Snyder and unfortunately and the Snyder cult and all that, and like this idea of like a Batman who kills. I'm just like that. The fucking book is not about that. The movie's not about that. It's not about like even in this, even as extreme as Batman gets, he still has that line he will not cross.
Exactly.
And I do think Miller is partly responsible for this because of that confusing scene with the mutant gang and the kidnapped kid, because you read that book, that you look at that panel, it's fucking confusing. It's really fucking confusing. You have to look closely to see that, oh, there's a bullet hole next to her head, and he shot the wall. And you have to put the piece together when later Yindel says she's reading this laundry list of charges against Batman. Not once does she ever mention murder in there.
Yeah, she never mentions a murder.
And when he goes up against the Joker, right, he can't do it. He can't do it.
He snaps the Joker's neck, but only to the point where the Joker's paralyzed. He can't go that extra step. And that was after he delivered the coldest line in the game, where he's just like, there's nothing about him I can't fix with my hands.
Right.
Yeah. And you're just like, oh shit. And even then, the Joker of all people is like, I knew that you couldn't do it, but don't worry. I'll take care of it for you. And he literally snaps his own neck to spite Batman. That is wild. Like, oh boy, that DKR Batman is pretty fucking disturbing.
Right. But that's one of the things that even in all that, he has that line, he will not cross. And this is a great with one of the recent shootings. I saw you posted this, was the famous image of him taking the shotgun and breaking it, and saying like, this is the weapon of the enemy. We don't use it. We don't need it.
We don't need it. We don't use it. And he takes this volatile mob and it's just like, look, tonight I will teach you everything you need to know, but tonight the only thing you need are your fists and your brains. And we're going to go out there and we're going to help these people, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to burn Gotham, we're not going to raise Gotham, we're going to save Gotham.
Right.
And he leads them, and the image of Batman on a horse leading a bunch of like other like vigilantes on horseback, it's one of the most metal things I've ever seen in my fucking life. And no matter how jaundiced I might get to the original work, god damn it, that's a good image.
Did you ever listen to Kevin Smith's Fat Man on Batman podcast back in the day?
I did, yeah, back in the day.
He did an interview with Grant Morrison talking about Batman. I'm not sure if you ever heard this.
I think maybe.
It was really cool. And he talked about the Killing Joke, and he came up with this theory of the Killing Joke that Batman actually kills the Joker at the end of that.
Yeah.
But also he also talked about The Dark Knight Returns. And he said the interesting thing about The Dark Knight Returns is it's an opera. He's like, you look at it, he's like, it becomes, he starts off and it's just like, it's very much, him on the streets and everything. And then eventually you get to this point where he's riding around on fucking horseback. And it's like, he's like, it's an opera. It's operatic.
He keeps ascending to the point where he literally fights a god.
Superman. Right. Yeah.
And he has the death and apotheosis.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
he dies and then ascends or descends, as the case may be.
Mhm.
But yes, very like the imagery, like Frank's art is by no means where it once was, but at this point,
Oh God,
Jesus.
this is just perfect.
Like-
And that's another thing I want to talk about is the animation, because
Oh yeah,
during this
crisp.
time in the DC animated movies, they were
Mhm.
trying to match the animation with the art style of the comic.
Yes.
And sometimes it works. Sometimes it
Mhm,
does. Sometimes it didn't work. Like I think when they started doing the original animated universe, they were trying to base things off the New 52 and everything. Like it doesn't work so much there because they can't really replicate Jim Lee's art style in that way.
No, not really.
His art style is so suited to the comic book page, but it's so hyper rendered and detailed, and you can't translate that into animation without making the animators lose their fucking minds.
Yeah, the rendering would be
Yeah.
like just to get all those symbols that they have on the bottom of the boots. Like,
Oh yeah,
they
yeah.
quit.
forget
There'd
it.
be a mass riot. Yeah,
Yeah. Or either that, they get to a point where they could eventually taste colors.
I mean, yeah, basically.
But but then other times there have been ones that have, and also I think the Superman Batman Apocalypse, where they're trying to replicate Michael Turner's style.
Yeah.
Couldn't quite make it work. Like those
It's
styles,
a little janky.
Yeah. But when they went for the more not simplified but less overly detailed, like it worked really well for the Public Enemies one where they're doing Ed McGuinness
Yes,
style.
very true.
Or when they did Gotham by Gaslight. That was another one where it worked pretty well.
Very good. Yeah.
But I think this and All-Star Superman to an extent too, where they're trying to mimic Quitely's art, it worked pretty well there.
Yeah.
But I think this one completely 100% fucking nailed it.
Mm-hmm. Look, I'm just gonna flat out fucking say it because it needs saying. Like the animation team who did the fight between Superman and Batman,
Mm-hmm.
they fucking knocked it out of the park. Like Batman v Superman, that one, yeah, that's how you do it. He literally picks up 2 parts of a steamroller and beats the shit out of Superman. And like, I was just like, holy fuck, because that's not in the comic. And I was like, Jesus.
That's what I was thinking. When I watched this, I'm like, wait a minute, was that in the comic? I don't remember that.
Nope. They threw that one in, and they make the fight so visceral because it's been building to this point. And here's the thing that everybody forgets. Even fans of the book itself. Batman and Superman are still friends.
Yes,
That's the thing. It's just that each is profoundly disappointed in the other for different reasons. They still care about each other a great deal. It's just that Bruce is emotionally exhausted with Clark having to constantly toe the line and try to be, living up to that whole truth, justice, and the American way crap. And simultaneously, Clark is frustrated with the fact that Bruce just keeps flipping over the apple cart. Like he just can't leave well enough alone because that's who he is. And even when they're fighting, Superman is constantly trying to talk to him and get him to stop. But Bruce won't do that because Bruce can't back down. Because not only is this his last statement as Batman publicly, it's also, as we find out, a double-blind fake out.
Right. Yeah.
The whole fight is choreographed. Batman knows what he's like, and people are just like, oh, it's so great when they fight. It's like, no, dude. Like the fight is a complete sham. It's a performance. And nobody gets it. They just want to see them, fight and use kryptonite mist and all this kind of shit. It's just like, that's cool, but
this is another thing that annoys.
Yeah.
This is another thing that annoys me about the whole, Batman can beat Superman argument thing. Because first off, it completely oversimplifies both characters to a ridiculous. But also another thing that annoys me about it is that you read that fight and Batman quote unquote wins, but he's got a lot of stuff that has to work out in his favor. You've got a Superman who's just been weakened from a nuclear fucking blast. And even then, the only way Batman wins, and you've got Superman who's still holding back. Even after he's been at the ground center of a nuclear explosion, he's been fucking emaciated, and then he's building back. He's in a weak state, and even in his weak state, he's still holding back against Batman. He's he's still trying to talk to him as Batman's fighting him. Superman, even in his weakened state, doesn't go all out here.
Exactly. Like if he put the effort into it, yeah, he probably could have popped Bruce's head like a zit, but he doesn't want to do that. Like even when he like defeats the Batmobile and rips the thing open, like he still has that great bit where he looks to Carrie Kelly. He's like, "Is it tonight a school night, young lady?" And it's like he's still Superman. Like he's not a bad guy. He might be misguided, you could argue, but he's still trying to help his friend. It's like when you see two friends and one of them's drunk trying to pick a fight with the other. I mean, the first one's just like, "Nah, man, I don't want it." Like he's constantly trying to make him stop. And like Batman can't stop. That's the gift and the curse of Batman. He's the most determined motherfucker on the planet. If he puts his mind to something, it's gonna happen. So
but also too, that other thing, like you said about the fake out thing. And I think that's another part that everybody misinterprets.
Everybody forgets.
Yeah. He fakes his death in that moment because he knows he can't beat Superman. And he's finally listening to Ollie because, like Ollie tells him when they meet, Ollie says, "Oh yeah, you always played it, mysterious, but it's a noisy kind of mysterious." And he's like, "You never learned how to really do this quietly and be effective." He's like, "You wanted the show, basically." And here, this is Batman being like, "You know what? Ollie's got a point. Like, I got to stop playing this game like this, and so I'll let I'll throw down with Superman and I'll let them think that I'm dead. And then I'm going to, and it, like you said, it's all a fake out. It's not, neither one of them is really committed to this fight.
Absolutely. And you'll note, of course, when they are at the funeral and Clark figures it out, he's just like, "I'm not going to tell."
Yeah.
Like,
that's a great scene.
That's a great
here where he's looking at Carrie and she's like, "Oh shit. And then he just kind of like smiles and winks at her. That's it.
Yeah, because that's the thing. He still loves his friend. Like they're brothers. Like they're brothers that have had a fight and are, they're a bit contentious, but they still care about each other. Like Clark does him the decency of like showing up in that one scene where like, and I fucking God bless the animators for this, because that pose in the comic was already great, but then they had the bald eagle come and land on his fucking arm. I was like, yes, this encapsulates DKR Batman's feelings about Superman to a T. He's just like, Jesus Christ.
There's one thing I found myself missing, and I understand why. I don't think that it would have worked well in animation, but when Superman's introduced in the comic book, like there's this great sequence of panels where
he's blurred.
It's like it's the American flag and it slowly morphs into the S shield.
Yeah.
And it was beautifully rendered. Like it's one of my favorite pages from The Dark Knight Returns. But I don't think you could really do that and have it make sense in animation. So I understand why they didn't do it. But man, I found myself missing that.
And that would have been fucking cool. As it stands, his introduction when he shows up to talk to Bruce, and Bruce is dressed up as the bag lady, and he's fighting the neo-Nazi mutant gang, and like the whole bit where like he flies around and saves people without them seeing him, and then like literally the lady shoots the fucking machine gun and he's just standing there for a minute, like in silhouette. Like, don't get me wrong, I've come to really despise the bit where Superman's eyes glow red and his face is in shadow, because that shit is so tired. But it's still pretty fucking cool when he like melts the gun and just like, he takes off and, we have to talk. That bit was great. Not here. Talk to you when I'm ready for you. We'll meet at the manor. And then they have that scene where they sit down together and talk. And like, you look better than you have in ages, but eventually, Bruce, somebody's going to come to me and ask me to stop you. And Bruce is just like, well, when that happens, let the best man win. He's just like, he's that chill. Like, it's fucking great.
I think there's a big misreading of Superman as well in this story, because this is, and I think a lot of people gloss over the backstory in this comic, and I think there's that, like you mentioned that line before where Superman's narrating and he says that they reference the parents groups coming after us and everything, which was all about, when you think about it, that he's talking about the Wardham trials.
Absolutely, he's talking about corruption of the innocent, that sort of thing. And there's this, you really get this sense that all the other heroes are gone
The only one who is still allowed to operate is Superman, because he's agreed to work with the government. And you really kind of see, and this is why I say, like, Frank Miller's politics are all over the place in this, because
Yes.
you see this and it's, a fucking indictment of Reagan, full stop. Like, this is not a Ronald Reagan that this is not like the Ronald Reagan that, the centrist media likes to remember. This is Ronald Reagan, the corrupt motherfucking asshole, which is what he was in reality. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, he's so shifty and slimy and just constantly talking out of both sides of his mouth. Like,
right. And you get the sense that Clark is and I know they explain this in DK2, which in a terrible way, where it's like this whole idea.
I don't. You say the words, but they're not going in. I don't understand.
Okay, so in this,
but yeah, in this hypothetical scenario,
I want to live. See, we're kind of in this intersecting dimensions thing. You're in a reality.
I'm in a reality where he disappeared mysteriously.
So in my universe, we had this. Frank Miller did a sequel called The Dark Knight Strikes Again. And Reagan was a hologram being controlled by Lex Luthor and Brainiac, and Superman was doing what the government wanted, because Luthor had the bottle city of Kandor kept prisoner, basically. And it's, it's fucking ridiculous. But I think, I like this interpretation. When I'm watching this, I get the interpretation, like, this is a Superman who, he grew up, raised in this, because you got to remember, this is set in the 1980s.
Yes,
so this is a Batman and Superman who were born in the 1930s, right? Because they're
absolutely,
like 50. So you're dealing with a Superman who grew up during the 40s and the 50s, and the idea of, like, the post-war era, and the Americana type of bullshit and all that kind of stuff. So he's got this right, and he grew up on he's a white kid growing up on a farm in Kansas. So the whole idea of, like, him growing up and believing in the American government and the American way, which anyone who knows anything about history, or anybody who's not a straight white guy, knows it was not this mythical paradise time.
Yeah, not sunshine and rainbows.
No. But for a middle class white kid growing up in the farmland, it seemed like a pretty good time. You got your parents telling you, raising you up to believe in truth, justice, and the American way. And you see that get corrupted by the Reagan Revolution and all that, and and I feel like this is a Superman who's just been broken from, like, Vietnam, from Watergate, and like and all that's kind of like there in the background. I kind of feel like he's like I still want to believe in that, but it's that like a lot of people did, like a lot of people went along with the bullshit.
I think he is still an idealist. If the Batman of Dark Knight Returns is the Adam West Batman, an argument could be made that the Superman of this is the George Reeves Superman.
Oh, definitely. I think definitely.
Where he is truth, justice, the American way, all that. And I think that we have to assume that, of course, Mom and Pa are gone. We don't get any reference to Lois or Metropolis or anything like that. We don't know what's going on with that. He has thrown himself fully into the role of Superman for all intents and purposes. So we don't really know, like, what's happening there. He still believes in the dream, but he's resigned himself to the fact that all he can do is put out fires and hope against hope that people will turn things around, because he has the power. Like, if Bruce had that power, oh shit, like, it would make the DKR Batman with DKR Superman's powers would make fucking Superman speeding bullets look like a trip through Candyland.
You know what I think, and I'm going to put this in a very modern political context, but Superman in this, he's basically Joe Biden.
Basically, yeah, he's Joe Biden. He just wants to keep the apple cart from completely flipping over, and he has the power.
He wants to believe that things are still normal, but they're not, and he's not waking up to that. Yeah,
no, and like, Batman has that great speech to him where it's like, you answer to an authority, like, you have literally surrendered. And it's like, it's like, yeah, it's as Kevin Smith mentioned in his commentary, I think, for Dark Knight Returns, was like, you fucking sold out, man. Like, you sold out. You bought in to the bullshit. Like, there was a time when, and we remember the golden age Superman in the 1930s. He was a shit disturber.
Right. Yeah.
Like, he was a
yeah.
two-fisted socialist crusader. Like,
Mhm.
he'd get a mad on against slum landlords and knock down their buildings. Hopefully, the people got out of them first. But anyway, and he'd beat up like domestic abusers. He'd go after political fat cats. He'd like toss, corrupt senators up in the air and catch them.
Mhm.
Like, and he was a guy who spoke truth to power. But then, of course, and I think this also ties back to Frederick Wertham, because it's the development of the Comics Code Authority. And that's when the superheroes stopped being vigilantes and started moving into being, defenders of the status quo.
Mhm.
Like, they don't really flip the shit over anymore. They're more about, let's just keep everything the same as it always is. And this Superman is still a party to that. But you could argue that DKR Batman has become kind of like self-aware in the narrative, and it's like, wait, this is bullshit, actually.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
we were shit disturbers. We were the guys who were supposed to like clean up the town, like step outside the law to help the people.
Yeah.
And now we've lost our way. So
I think that's why I love Ollie so much in this, because I think
exactly.
because he's a character who came to this kind of realization and this is kind of like a weird. I feel like the more I think about Dark Knight Returns, the more I think it's a commentary on the Reagan Revolution. It's a commentary on the 80s, but it's also a commentary on the comic industry as a whole.
Mhm.
And it's calling out Superman for selling out and for agreeing to go along with it. Whereas, and if you look at the evolution of these characters, Superman had been pretty consistent with that ever since the Wardham stuff, and very much like the almost like frozen in amber for
Mhm.
up until Man of Steel and John.
Yeah, you could argue
Post-Crisis.
1986. Yeah,
Right. Which this would have been done at the same time, so it's understandable why that.
I think it's one of the things that John and the team decided was like, okay, he's going to be powerful, but he's going to have real limits here. Like, we can't make him like it's him and the Spectre, and the Spectre better be eating his Wheaties. We got to make him tough, but not that strong. It's like in Superman the animated series, where like
Right.
he's strong, but he'll still get knocked on his ass.
Mm.
Like, one of my favorite bits in that is when he tries to like stop the plane by grabbing the wing, and he accidentally pulls off the wing. And he's like, "Nice one, Clark." And just like, he's still learning, he's still developing. It's unfortunate that version of him was just the one that they were working with, because they could have had a real commentary on him being like this force for change that suddenly decided to compromise. It's actually, in a weird way, he's almost like the hippies of the 60s who became the yuppies of the 80s. Like,
Exactly.
sold out and bought in.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the perfect description of him. He is he's basically like a commentary on the whole boomer generation.
Exactly. Like, he still thinks that he can enact positive social change, but he has become part of the very mechanisms that he once fought against.
Right. Whereas I think this is like some of the meta commentary Miller's making on the industry, whereas Batman had kind of gone against that thanks to O'Neill and Adams, but Green Arrow had gone like completely off script from there.
Oh yeah.
Like the Green Arrow of Hard Traveling Heroes is, if you read those stories back to back, you would be and if I just went through and changed the names of the characters or like obscured them, you would be forgiven for not thinking that those are two different characters, because they basically were.
Yeah, Ollie's just great. I mean, he's basically a glorified cameo.
Yeah.
But when he's there, he's so good. And that whole bit where he pulls off the shot and manages to like get a piece of Clark
with his fucking teeth.
With his fucking teeth. Like, that is the most metal shit in the world. Like, let's see Hawkeye pull that one off. I mean, good Lord. And he manages to pull it off, and like, hi-yo goddamn silver. Like, fucking no notes. Perfect.
Yeah.
Like, just absolutely perfect.
I was, I'm rewatching this last night, and I'm thinking, I'm like, what I really want to see is I want to see like a Green Arrow series that kind of captures this version of the character, or like, this like, this leftist version of the character, because as good as the Longbow Hunters were, it almost completely eschewed all the political stuff from the character.
Yeah, the thing about the Longbow Hunters is it's just kind of like a revenge narrative, and it does some really not great things to Dinah that I did not appreciate and still don't.
Yeah.
but I do think that there was a point where they almost had the settings. I think it was around Rebirth where Star City suddenly had this big forest in the middle of it, and he kind of became like a Robin Hood analog.
Oh yeah, the
where he was
Benjamin Percy
operating.
run. That was really good.
Yeah, that was really good. And I think that the thing about oh boy, the problem with Arrow, and Arrow was great, was that he was Batman.
Exactly.
That was basically all he was. They didn't have a chance to like really play with the actual character of Oliver Queen, where he's a shit disturbing, loudmouth liberal. I think my favorite interpretation of him outside of this is, of course, the one in Justice League Unlimited.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
I think you're what I protested against in college. It's just like he's just so great. Like Oliver works best in the group where he's just like in the back and always arguing for the little guy. And that's what I love about him. Like he's cantankerous, he's curmudgeonly, but he cares a lot about you. And
it's like I always say, Oliver Queen at his best is Bernie Sanders with a bow and arrow.
With a bow and arrow, yeah, exactly. And he knows kung fu, so he will absolutely wreck your shit.
Yeah,
and he's creative enough to make a boxing glove arrow. I mean, for Jesus' sake, that's some talent there.
I mean, if DC ever hires me to do a project, I would want to do a project like an out of continuity, a Black Label's graphic novel or limited series or something with like Oliver Queen as like this, this far left antagonist against like in a late stage capitalist dystopia. I think that's the perfect setting for that character. And I don't understand why nobody's done that.
I think that's just the perfect setting for superheroes in general, because they need to get back to their punk rock roots. I mean, the status is not quo anymore. We've got to show them, shit disturbing. Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things that we ultimately come away from with this, is that Batman realizes, okay, the old ways aren't going to work. I got to be a bit more quiet, but I'll teach this next generation the best of what I've got, and hopefully they can go on and make something of it. So that's what I love about this. It's an interesting, interesting book and movie. Like there's just the way that, I'm just gonna, the funeral and his relationship with Selena, because we get to see Selena in a little bit, and like that was one of the first bits where I was like, I started to pull away from Frank a little bit, because he makes Selena a madam,
right?
And then also a prostitute, and I'm just like, Frank, come on, man.
This is where it started.
But, this is where it all started to go wrong.
I'm not sure. But there was I think it was like maybe 10 years ago. There was this webcomic called Short Packed. I'm not sure if you ever read it.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
So for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, there's this great one where the guy who did it, he had a lot of it was ostensibly about a bunch of people working in a toy store, but he also had a lot of these other stuff with just like commentary on comics and pop culture in general. One of my favorite ones is there are a bunch of these shadowy like government types, and they have Frank Miller prisoner. They're like, we're glad you came here, Frank Miller. Now here's your assignment. We're going to put a gun to your head. You have to write a story about women in which she is not a woman who is not a prostitute. And he starts typing, W H, and the rest of it just like horror. And you see the gun click.
Oh, Frank, never change.
But this is where it started, because then after this we got year one where he came right out and made Selena a prostitute.
And you're just like, Frank. Yeah. Frank, no. She's a jewel thief. She's one of the most talented jewel thieves on the planet. And just let her be that.
Which it upset me in Dark Knight Rises when they kept that origin story for her, with her being like a prostitute. Or like they kind of hinted at it, and they kind of hinted that she does whatever she needs to do to get the mark, and you're like, ugh. But I'm glad the Batman didn't seem to go that route. They did not. That was refreshing. Yeah. They made her very much like, she's a thief. She sometimes dresses slinky to get what she needs to obtain in order to pull off her heists, but she's very much, not bad, not good, just kind of like in it for herself, but still she's got a code. There's lines she won't cross, that sort of thing, which I appreciate. Yeah. So nothing against sex workers or anything like that either. Oh, absolutely not. But but the idea that there was this trend that if we're gonna make a villainous character edgy, we have to make her a former prostitute or something, and we have to make her a sex worker as seen through the filtered lens of a dude, right? So like, it's not going to be the most nuanced portrayal in the world. Yeah. So and that's an unfortunate
side effect. So.
Yeah. But yeah, the animation in this is just amazing, and like
Right.
the way they capture like when I think of the understated aspects of what makes Dark Knight Returns so good, the comic book, is Lynn Varley's coloring. Like she knew how to really make Miller's pencils and inks really kind of pop,
jump off the page. Yeah.
And that really, and Claus Johnson too, he yanked it, so I should give him
absolutely,
credit. Yeah. But yeah, but when you compare it to the stuff that he did since without her, it's just like it's not the same. It's lacking.
Not quite the same. Yeah. It's absolutely great. The animation is crisp. Everybody, like the cast is great. I mean, we haven't, Ariel Winter as Carrie Kelly, Wade Williams as Harvey Dent, Two-Face, which we haven't really talked about, but absolutely crushes it. David Selby as Commissioner Gordon, Mike McKeon as Dr. Bartholomew Wolper, and Mark Valley. Got to give it up to Mark Valley as Superman, because his Superman is really good. Like,
I mean, I wasn't so settled on Michael Emerson's Joker though. I feel like
I feel it's tough because you're always in a vocal performance. You're always in the shadow of Hamill. Right. It's tough to like really break out. I mean, even Troy Baker, as talented as he is, just does a riff. It's tough. I mean, I don't know who I would have cast as an older Joker.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Hamill. It'd be tough. I mean,
I feel like
Jeff Bennett?
I feel like you just need a voice that's a little bit more maniacal. Like his voice is fine when he's in the Arkham home, but when he gets out, it still has that kind of like not quite, it's almost
not
monotone.
Quite there.
Yeah, and it just doesn't quite reach there. And
when it's the Joker, you expect a certain amount of over the top.
Right,
like,
right.
He's an absolute monster, but he loves every minute of it. But I was thinking, but now that I put my head on it, I mean, you need somebody like who could do a really good Bowie, because it's very obvious that the Joker and DKR is David Bowie's like Thin White Duke persona, basically. That would be something that I would think about. But yeah.
Ariel Winter did a perfect job. Like if I had ever, when I like, that was like, whenever I read this book and I was like that, it's basically that voice I heard in my head.
Yeah, basically.
And they cast that perfectly.
She handles the future slang really well. So she manages to handle that, and she's just great. I mean, Robin in this is one of my favorite Robins out there. I mean, I think it only belongs in this particular piece, but they've definitely like picked up the ball in terms of like when Stephanie Brown was Robin, and before she went back to being Spoiler. There's something to be said for the Carrie Kelly Robin, and for this portrayal in general. I mean, it's not one that I want to visit on the regular, but for this story, it absolutely
works. Yeah. Now, I read that some people apparently they criticized the Cold War subplot in this, but I feel like it's hard to change that without making it a completely different story. I think you have to view this as a period piece. That's the only way to really view it.
You have to acknowledge it. I mean, my internal headcanon was like, this is the Dark Knight Returns movie that should have come out shortly after the comic book, like 87, 88. This should have come out. And we didn't get it then, but we get it now. So I absolutely think that it has to operate within the parameters of the Cold War, because you have to have that. Otherwise, you miss out on one of the most iconic sequences from the book, which is Superman versus a nuke.
Right. Yeah.
Which is just like, it's almost that imagery was Indiana Jones cresting the rise and seeing the H-bomb cloud of its time. Like, it's this classic hero facing down something that is very real and very much something that could wipe out all of humanity.
Right.
And you get that amazing sequence where like he gets jacked, like he's a desiccated husk. And that's one of the most striking images of all time, like the nuclear blast imagery. Like I to this day, sometimes my brain is like, did he whip this up on a computer somehow? Like the way that the lightning crackles around Superman's form looks so weird. And then when he lands and crashes on the ground and he absorbs the energy from the plant and he's talking to the earth itself as though it were his mother. Like, that shit is wild. It's one of the trippiest sequences in the whole book. You could probably have lifted it from the movie, but they chose to leave it in, and it's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I think about all the Warner Brothers animation, like honestly, I think this might be my favorite of the animated films.
It's touch and go with me. I really like New Frontier.
And New Frontier is really good. Yeah, that's
New
true.
Frontier is really good. I think that New Frontier and this film are very much companion pieces in that they are two different polarities of the superhero genre, but at the same time they're very complementary to each other. And Cook even acknowledges it in the book because he has Superman and Batman have a fight.
Right.
But here's the thing. They faked it. They deliberately faked that fight so that, ostensibly Superman was helping Batman get some breathing room. So that's some cool shit.
I love that. I love that scene in the New Frontier comic.
Yeah, when Superman meets up with Batman and like Robin is just like so jazzed to meet Superman, and and Clark goes to Bruce, kids knew that's something, and Batman's like trying something different now. And he's just like Bruce, you big fucking softy. Like I love that. Oh yeah, it's great, and it's a wonderful companion piece to this. Yeah. I mean, I would argue that year one's pretty good too.
Year one's good, but I don't know, like
animation,
it just I don't know, the year one story, it just I get why they focus it so much on Gordon, but I just feel like there's too much Gordon, not enough Batman for a Batman year one story. I feel like Batman's almost like a supporting character in what's supposed to be his movie. And also I don't like the way that Miller handled the marriage affair and all that kind of stuff. Like I feel like it's just
a bit weird. Yeah, it's not what you want it to be.
Right.
Which is, and they've kind of tried to revisit this a couple times in other different media to a greater or lesser extent. You know what I think would make for a great animated adaptation, but haven't done it yet, but they really should, would be Batman Year 2. Because that'd be interesting.
I read that fairly recently. That'd be interesting.
I mean, as its own little Elseworlds thing, obviously, because to my way of thinking, as much as Joe Chill is interesting, Joe Chill is also fucking horrible because Bruce should never have caught the killer.
Yeah, I agree.
Of his parents. Like, it's an interesting Elseworlds. And the image of Batman with a gun is just like so jarring, especially when it's drawn by Alan Davis. But I would love to see that. The Reaper is just one of the most, just so cool a design. Like, how can you not love that? But
again, we got a little bit of a version of that with Mask of the Phantasm, because
Phantasm, your Angel of Death.
A lot of stuff came from that.
Mask of the Phantasm is easily, arguably the best Batman movie.
True. Yeah, I mean,
it's hard to debate.
Putting that one aside, though, I think this one, or at least of the more modern DC animated stuff, I think this would probably be my favorite.
This is a good one. Yeah, it's real good. I don't know, man. Like, I'm touch and go because sometimes I'm like, yeah, New Frontier, and sometimes I'm like, ooh, but Superman Red Sun, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm hard to settle on, but it's definitely in the top 5.
Yeah,
without question. It's like die-cast metal construction. It is solid and it is dependable, and you can slide it into your Blu-ray player or queue it up on your streaming, and you're gonna have a good time.
Yeah. I mean, and there's parts of it that still wow me, like that first scene when Batman comes back out onto the scene.
Shit.
Like that's just an amazing sequence.
Yeah,
like
that bit where the older cop's like, "Oh, you're in for a show tonight, son." It's just like, oh fuck. And that whole bit with the reporters where it's like reported some kind of creature, and the reporter's like, "You don't think?" And he like jumps across the lightning goes off, and you're like, "Fuck yes, Batman, go get him!" Like, it's so good. And the only thing that's missing is the rain on my chest is like a baptism. Like, oh, that shit. I mean, not all the dialogue, not all the narration, but maybe just a little bit, a little bit every now and then. But
there's one line of dialogue though that I feel like they should have. I've never liked. I know it's a famous line from the comic, but I've never really liked it. And it's the second fight with the mutant leader, and he says, "This is not a mud pit; it's an operating table, and I'm the surgeon." I've just never liked that line. I'm just feel like, okay, I'm like it feels like you're trying too hard now.
it's the line that people focus on, but the real one, the one that should put shivers up your back, is like, my instincts tell me to stop with the leg.
Yeah.
I don't listen to them. It's just like, oh shit, Batman.
Yeah.
And he's like standing in the mud over the mutant leader's broken body, and you're just like, oh wow, okay. Yeah, he's not playing around anymore, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a weird kind of janky line, but you know, the whole thing of it is like he's walking right up to the red line of his code. Like he's not gonna kill him, but he's definitely gonna leave him broken for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
oof.
But yeah, I've got such a love-hate relationship with this source material though, and it's just
yeah, it's frustrating because on the one hand, like we've been sitting here and we've been like, oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's so cool. That's dope. That's amazing. But unfortunately, as we've said previously, all the wrong lessons were taken from this story. And people thought, oh, well, this is dark. We should do it even darker. And you're like, no, you can't. Stuff like this should be an exception and not the rule, because the more you try to make things darker and realistic, the more you deconstruct, the harder it is to put things back together and make them fun, you know?
Yeah. I think so much of this, and I think just like with Watchmen, the lesson that people failed to learn is the whole point of both these stories is that these guys are broken. They're not, and it is like you said, it's a deconstruction. That's what it was supposed to be. And it's not supposed to be the standard going forward.
No.
And I think that's the biggest wrong lesson to take from this. Like, you don't want a Batman who is like the Punisher, because what's the point?
No, because Batman, people always forget, like I've mentioned this before, but you know, Batman's whole thing is that, I think it's encapsulated in Kingdom Come so amazingly, is Clark calls him out and is just like, look, the whole reason that you're Batman is because you don't want people to die. Like he throws himself between, you know, that family that he wants to save in the alley and crime. Like, he made a child's vow. I'm going to war on crime. He gave himself an impossible task, but vengeance isn't his deal. His deal is that he goes out there to protect people, and he does it in a full court press, like with the Wayne Foundation. You know, he does it with, you know, he trains all these kids. He has the biggest family in the world for such a brooding loner. Like, he wants to help people. Like, that's the core of who Batman is.
That's what I loved about the Batman. That's what I loved about the Batman. Like, they had him go on that arc, and he goes from I'm vengeance to no, I'm a hero. That's when I'm
exactly.
Yeah.
He realizes that one person going out and beating the Jesus out of criminals isn't going to solve the problem.
Right.
But if he's out there as a deterrent and as a symbol, as something that people can rally around, like as something they know that there's somebody out there on their side who's trying to help them. Like, that's where Batman's at his most effective. Like, there's always this tired argument that Bruce Wayne with his billions should just buy crime and just solve all the problems. And it's like, look, I get it. That's a very glib answer, and sure, it'll get you some, you know, brownie points with certain people. But at the end of the day, Bruce is already doing that. He's already, like, my headcanon is that he keeps just enough money to keep up appearances. And fund his war on crime. Everything else goes to the Wayne Foundation.
Yeah.
Everything else goes to, like, trying to live up to his mother and father's highest ideals. Like, he wants to go out there and help people. He funds the Justice League, for God's sake. He pours money into all his various ventures, and like the Teen Titans, like everything. He'll do whatever is needed. Like, he's probably pushed that fortune so far into the red that Lucius Fox is just barely managing to keep the lights on.
I feel like so many of the people who make these, you know, these asinine Batman's just a cop, Batman, you know, just goes out, beats up poor people, comments you see on Twitter, they're made by people who have never read a fucking comic book in their life. And the only image they have of Batman is from like the Snyder movies, and that's it.
Yeah.
Or the Nolan films, and that's it.
They're trying to apply the real world and logic to an escapist character.
Right.
Like, it's not going to work. Like, you know, it's well, why wouldn't Superman conquer the planet? Like he's why shouldn't he just be like the Homelander? Because he's a good dude.
Mhm.
Like Clark Kent is your best friend. He's the uncle who slips you a sip of his beer and helps you fix your car when
I feel
you're,
like a lot of these people too,
yeah.
they seem to miss the point that these are fictional characters. And if you
Yeah.
if you say, okay, yeah, Batman should use all his money and not dressing up as a bat, but then helping.
Mhm.
Like, okay, so then you're just going to get a bunch of stories with a rich guy funding charities. Do you really want to watch that movie? I don't think you do.
I don't think you want 90 minutes of that. And I mean,
Yeah.
look, I mean, superhero stories were built and designed to be parables for children. And
Right.
unfortunately, stories like The Dark Knight Returns and The Watchmen kind of shoehorn the real world in there.
Mhm.
And it's kind of poisoned the well a little bit in
Yeah,
terms of like, we can't really go back to the fun good old days of like, hey, a sea monster shows up and starts attacking Metropolis. Now we got to be like, well, where'd the sea monster come from?
Mhm.
Where did it get spied? Is it a mutant? Did it come from another dimension? What is this? What is that? What is this? What is that? It's the cinema sensification of comic books. Like everything has to like get ahead of a ding that somebody's going to point out. Like, and it's exhausting because
So
I
Derek,
just want to have a fun time.
yeah, Derek had said something like this, and he was specific.
Mm.
He was speaking specifically to the Nolan movies, but I think this argument applies for like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns. But he said that his problem with the Nolan movies is that in trying to make Batman realistic and trying to show Batman in the real world and ground it, is like all it did to him was prove that Batman doesn't work in the real world.
Well, yeah, the whole thesis of the Nolan movies is that being Batman is stupid, actually.
Right. Yeah.
That's the whole point. I mean, aside from that one bit in, Batman Begins is pretty good, but I think the reason I mainly like Batman Begins so much is because there's a lot of like similarities between it and Mask of the Phantasm.
Mhm.
But there is that one image at the end of the movie where like Batman is staring out over the city, and I think we're meant to take from it like Bruce being like, Jesus, this is never going to end, is it?
Right. Right.
And then, of course, like he goes through his things where he eventually decides, oh, I don't want to be Batman anymore. I wasn't Batman for 8 years. And like sitting there in Dark Knight Rises, I immediately crossed my arms and glared at the screen because I was like, Batman gave up. Batman, my friend, my dude, my brother in Christ. Batman does not give up. That's the whole thing of Batman. He will keep coming. Like Dark Knight Returns was an beyond the box case because he just decided, look, I can't keep going up this hill. I'm getting older and I lost Jason, and maybe I should hang it up. But even then, he comes back around to it because Batman doesn't give up.
Well, I mean, same thing. If you look at like Batman Beyond too, it's the same type of idea where the only reason he gives up is because he physically can't do it anymore.
He physically can't do it anymore. Like, and to the point where he has to draw a gun. Like, I would have had a little more respect for The Dark Knight Rises if they'd shown us a sequence where he was Batman, but he physically couldn't do it anymore. Like, we see his leg give out and he has to pull the gun. And I would have respected the movie more for that rather than just have him pull a Howard Hughes and just be in his house.
Right.
Talking about his sled or whatever. Like I was not impressed.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. But yeah. But I think that's all we got to say about Dark Knight Returns.
The long and the short of it is watch it, have a good time with it, but just be aware that for better or worse, it had its impact on the medium. And you gotta take the rough with the smooth.
I mean, it's still a good story at the end of the day. It's still a good story, but it's just like, I think people overemphasize the impact that it should have. And I think they're, like you said, they're learning the wrong lessons from it. And I think we got to, just remember that, yes, it's a really good Batman story, but it's not the only Batman story. There are other good Batman stories, and this should not be the standard. Like, this is set in a specific world in a specific time, and it's a specific message. Frank Miller, obviously he undercut this message himself when he went and he did, All-Star Batman and Robin. He shows Batman. No, Batman's always been like this. And it's like, well,
Batman's always been crazy. Yeah.
Which that's part of the thing that is overlooked. I think even Miller himself forgot this. And we can get into the whole thing, like how much of All-Star Batman and Robin was Miller parodying himself. I feel like I get that argument, but partly I feel like Miller only said that after everybody was like, this is fucking insane.
Oh yeah. Old Frank. Yeah. Oh boy.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like people need to realize it's not the only Batman story. There's other Batman stories that are just as good, maybe even better.
It allows for a darker take on the character, and sometimes that can be fun to explore. Right. Absolutely, but it kind of became a victim of its own hype. Yeah. Like it became this template that they didn't want to deviate from whatsoever, because it almost became like a talisman to DC Comics. Like, we gotta make something as good as this. We've got to do something as good. That's why you get stuff like Jim Starlin's The Cult, and you're just like, ooh boy. Oh
well,
boy.
I think part of the problem too is also with a lot of people citing these as like the two books that people new to comics should read. And I'm like, no. These are comics you should read after you've experienced a lot of other comics, because then you'll understand what they're doing.
Yeah, after you found some things that you like, try a few things on, and if you want to go back and see what all the hubbub was about, you can definitely check out both The Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. Right. They got a lot of things that are interesting, but at the end of the day, you should also treat it like, less as the greatest thing ever, and more like, this was where the medium was at the time, where it started to kind of question itself, started to ask some questions about it, about the genre of superhero fiction. Unfortunately, as we've said, everybody thought this was the thing to beat, but it's just, look, I'm just going to say it. I mean, as much as I love Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, I'm a Squadron Supreme kid. That was the shit. Like, don't get me wrong, these guys are great. Like, both tied for silver, but Squadron Supreme, when they make that movie, whoo, or Disney Plus streaming show, whoo, I don't think they're ready for that. Like, whew, good stuff. But yeah, this is great. Absolutely, check out The Dark Knight Returns. You will not regret it. And if you want to check out Year One, you could definitely do that too. You could maybe pair it into a double bill. I wouldn't go out of my way, but if you want to see the bookends, yeah, by all means, go ahead.
I mean, also, one of the things I like about this too is that because a lot of the DC animated movies, they try to keep them. They try to force them into that 90-minute block. And I felt like this was one of the weaknesses with All-Star Superman, was in trying to force it into that 90-minute block. They left some stuff out that I thought was really important to that story. And I feel like they are like, no, we're not doing that. We're going to let this story fully breathe. I mean, like, the individual parts are over 90 minutes even, right? I mean, I believe so. Oh no, they're like 75 minutes each, but they split up in two. But together it's like it's 2.5 hours. So I mean, it's not a short movie and it's good. They gave it the time it needed to tell the story properly.
Yeah, they make a meal of it, and they they are at once very attentive to the source material, but not afraid to tweak things a little bit to make it more cinematic. Like the loss of the voiceover and stuff like that. And a lot of the imagery lends itself, like, it homages a lot of the imagery from the comic, but it doesn't necessarily have to be one-to-one translation of it, which I appreciate.
Yeah. I thought it did a really good job of towing that line as well. Okay, Stacy, it's always fun when you come on. We always got to have you come back on again.
Oh, definitely. I'm always game.
But why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Well, you can find me online at StacyHD on Twitter, where that's the most reliable place you can grab me for my own personal opinions on pop culture and various whatnots. I also am co-host of the Fanboy Power Hour podcast with my brother Ryan. Every week we sit down and talk about pop culture, nerdy stuff from our own 40s-ish fanboy perspective. So the two ironies are that neither of us are boys, and the podcast is very rarely an hour. because we're both talkative.
Okay, and that does it for this episode of Superhero Cinephiles. SuperheroCinephiles.com is the website. Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And don't forget, if you sign up for the Patreon at any level, you also get the companion show, Superhero Cinephiles Book Club, where we talk about comic books and graphic novels and all that fun stuff. And also, you get these episodes, the regular show, a week in advance if you do that too. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. If you enjoyed the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.